This is the Inside Data Center podcast. We talk to the people who power the data center sector to give you insider info on everything happening in DC today. Here's your host, Andy Davis.
Welcome to the Inside Data Center podcast. We are back again, joined by Ben Baldieri for the second edition of Data Center News and GPUs. Afternoon, Ben.
Good afternoon, Andy. Yeah, it's been a little while since the last one, hasn't it? Lots happened in the past couple of months.
Exactly. I know. We said we'd do one a month. We're on about one every 6 weeks at the moment, which is
right.
making it difficult to catch up with the news. But there you go. But you've been out at GTC, and obviously we've been busy traveling around. So, but still, good to get it in. We're still stuck with the name Data Center News and GPUs. Haven't had any suggestions for better ones, so that's what we're going with now. We're going to give you another whistle-stop run through of some of the biggest news or the most traction news that we've had, whether it's GPU or data center related. Don't know how we start this, Ben. Do you want to start? Ben's fresh off a plane from the US, so
yeah,
I'll let
right.
you go.
The joys of a Heathrow fire. I think the biggest one has got to be GTC. To be honest, the GTC was super interesting. I was out there for the week. The keynote, I mean, aside from feeling like we're in a bit of a cult, to be honest, because when you're queuing at 7:30 in the morning for a 20,000 person stadium and you're a long way at the back of the queue and then it's sold out and people are being turned away to see a tech CEO speak. I mean, it's a little bit culty, but on the other hand, super, super interesting based on the content. And two things really stood out to me from it. One being there was no mention of training anywhere in the keynote. No mention of model training at all. The focus was almost entirely on inference. And this arbitrary measure that Jensen seems to have introduced for the AI factory concept, which is tokens per second per megawatt, which I think is quite an interesting nod as to where NVIDIA seem to be trying to guide the market, which from where I'm sat and from the massive amount of financial modeling work that I've done over the course of the past 6 months or so, makes perfect sense, because training, you're constrained really in terms of how much revenue you can make. It's a race to the bottom. Someone is always going to be able to undercut you on GPU per hour charges, but inference, where you've got the Xerox model, where it's copies, basically, you deploy the infrastructure, you get your customers to come in, and their charges are coming out of OpEx. The cash flow profiles are fundamentally different. So from a hardware owner standpoint, really interesting that that's where things are going. From a business standpoint as well, and then actually creating enterprise value with all of this wonderful training that has been done and these models that are now reaching these lofty heights by various benchmarks. Inference is where the value is going to be created. Now, what that value creation looks like, I think that's still the question that needs to be asked. But it seems like that's where the industry is going to be going probably pretty quickly over the course of the next 12 months or so, which, as you know how this industry moves, right? It's like dog years. 12 months is going to be 7 years. So we'll see where we end up.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I watched the Jensen keynote. Obviously, I wasn't there, wasn't in the queue, but he kept talking about it being an inflection point, didn't he, for AI and trillion-dollar data center industry, et cetera, et cetera. And then since then, you've seen quite a lot of shifts in the hyperscalers kind of strategy, I guess, is for want of putting it a better way. So there's definitely a period of thought going on at the moment as to what's next. What do we do next? What I think someone said the other day, you don't want to build a data center that is totally useless, because that's kind of where they're getting to now. So I think inflection point is a good way to look at it. And like you say, moving away from training and moving into the actual, can we make money out of AI, I suppose, is where most people are looking at it now. Like, where's the money? Where's the cash? Where's the return of investment? Because it's a big investment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that DeepSeek has been really interesting in that regard, because obviously the market reaction was everything's fallen apart. That's it. It's the end of days. And then from what was said in the keynote, because DeepSeek and the reasoning models that have proliferated off the back of it, due to the fact that DeepSeek open source an awful lot of their work, reasoning models chew through a huge amount of tokens, which again, from a hardware owner's perspective, is super interesting. I think the statistic that Jensen used was it requires like 100 times more compute than expected, which is great from both the data center standpoint and also from a compute deployment standpoint, because we're going to need a hell of a lot more capacity. But again, that then feeds into, it's all well and good needing the capacity, but what is that capacity going to be used for? So I think use cases are going to be the most important thing going forward, especially second part of the keynote. If you are having to deploy 600 kilowatt racks or above, right? Which from a data center standpoint sounds like a bit of a headache. I'm sure you'll have some perspective there.
Yeah, I think it's crazy. The rack side of it, from a non-technical, but it's just crazy where it's going and where it can get to. And I think it's one of the biggest challenges. It's what density, where does it end? What is the density we're building for? And I think that is why we've seen a lot of this, as I say, like fluctuation in the markets and a bit of uncertainty. And you can totally understand why. If you're investing tens and tens of billions of dollars into this industry in a period of such uncertainty, it is a big gamble. And at some point, the money behind it does have to say, hang on a minute, like, are we doing the right thing here? They might pause and go again, but they need to reevaluate and ensure they're doing the right thing. And you've kind of got to reevaluate every couple of weeks at the moment. And that's, again, that is a challenge. And, NVIDIA are one of others as well, aren't they? So there's all this research going on into the background, and yeah, it's a crazy time. And I liked the bit on the humanoids, the robots as well. Like, that was cool. And I think when you start talking about data and capacity and demands in that area, you're in another world. And I think, I know that's not here now, but that's coming. And every year he does a keynote, there's a better robot. So I don't think it'll be long until those robots are walking among us. And if they're not already, who knows? They may be already.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think the other interesting piece there to that point too, one, robotics is I mean, no one knows what that's going to look like. But I mean, if you've spent enough time reading sci-fi, you've probably got a pretty good understanding of where things might be going.
Yeah, didn't he say it'll be the biggest industry ever? Something along those lines.
Yeah, right. Like everything that moves could be potentially automated, and everything that moves could therefore, by extension, potentially require some sort of thinking per se, right? Which means that it might be a model, it might be whatever the next iteration of AI is, and that's probably going to need some compute of some sort. I think the other interesting thing, though, was that there was no real mention of the hyperscalers in like a partnership context, right? Because if you look back at previous keynotes, there was generally a nod towards like partnerships with Meta or partnership with AWS or Azure or something along those lines. But those guys are making their own chips now, right? That's eating into NVIDIA's market share. Lepton AI was a purchase that NVIDIA is apparently considering that cropped up recently. And Lepton offers GPUs per hour, right? Which is kind of cloud service. So wouldn't be surprised, based on what was not said and the relative degree of complexity that is going to be, that is required to deploy a 600 kilowatt rack, right? I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing NVIDIA going a little bit more into the cloud side as well, because it makes sense, right? If your competitors are building chips, why not compete with them at their game too?
Yeah, exactly. It is a battle for business at the end of the day. I think you have to remember that. And it's similar on my side. The biggest news was the TD Cowen and Microsoft's news of cancelling leases, which ties in again with the moving away from partnerships, because it was all linked to allegedly it was linked to the OpenAI partnership, which now we believe OpenAI are going to look to develop their own infrastructure, which again makes sense. If you want to own the infrastructure, it's probably the right way to do it. Whether that's true or not, we'll have to wait and see. But Microsoft cancelling a number of leases. I think last week it was 2 gigawatt across the US and Europe. Gigawatts. Previously, we saw projects stop, reevaluation of strategy, and we know there's a strategy review happening here. But again, ties into that what is the strategy? And I don't mean with Microsoft, I mean generally, like what do we do going forward? You know, how do we capitalize on this? Are we moving away from training? You know, are these data centers being built for the right purposes? Are they in the right places for what they're required? I'm sure there's a big review going on somewhere of a lot more intelligent people than myself looking into it and trying to work out where best to spend this capex. I never see it as an industry challenge. I just see it as another reevaluation point where everyone's kind of like, oh no, you know, what do we do? We've just announced $100 billion of capex for 2025. Are we spending $100 billion in the right place? And I think we'll see that probably across this year. I think we'll continue to see it with some of the other hyperscalers as well. Won't just be Microsoft that are reviewing where and when to spend.
Oh yeah, definitely. And I think to the Microsoft point with OpenAI, OpenAI have also just announced a partnership with, or a very large deal with CoreWeave, right? Who've also just very recently gone public too. And I think that amounted to like $12 billion or something, which is absolutely astronomical. That is kind of, from my perspective and from what I'm seeing with other people, contingent on OpenAI being able to successfully close their next funding round, which apparently they're very close to doing, with SoftBank, it being like a 40 billion round or something absurd like that. But then that's also contingent on OpenAI being able to transition to a fully full profit model as well, right? And whether or not they're going to be able to do that from a legal challenge standpoint kind of remains to be seen. And then also the 2 gigawatts of cancellations I've read this morning, that while Microsoft has pulled back on those, apparently those same sites were scooped up by Meta and Google very, very quickly. So I think this kind of taps into what we were speaking about in the first one that we did all of those 6 weeks ago, right? In that I think there's a little bit of brinkmanship going on, in that I think things probably started a little bit before people really wanted them to, but you can't not do it in case your competitors have something that you want, right? It's better to have something and give it up and pay a little bit of money for it, right? As opposed to need something that you can't get because your competition's already got hold of it.
Yeah, totally, definitely seen it, and yeah, I've heard similar as well. Which again is why I don't ever see it. I laugh when I post these kind of announcements, because you get the panic stations from everybody. It's like, you know, don't read too much into it, is what I always say to people. You know, like, do your research, understand the market, talk to people, and you can actually gauge what is actually really happening. You'll never see what's really happening in the public, but you know, pick the phone up, have conversations, and you'll quickly see what's out there.
Ask people questions and they tend to tell you the answers, right?
That's it. Especially in this industry, you can't tell anyone anything, but you can tell anyone everything.
Yeah, right.
Is the way I look at it. I quickly scanned through some of the projects that broke as well in the last few weeks, and again, you know, when you look at investment, you're continuing to see this wave of 100-acre sites, multi-billion-dollar investments, new funds raising. It's still happening regularly. So we had a £1 billion data center and technology park in Anglesey in Wales, which I think raised a lot of eyebrows with regards to who's the customer for that one. You know, it's an interesting location. UAE obviously continue to invest significantly, 30 to 50 billion euro AI data center in France, big range there. Stone Shield, 500 megawatt in Spain. Azora, 2 billion development in Zaragoza, again Spain. Evrock, 96 megawatt in France. QTS obviously got approval for the big site in the northeast of England, which is approximately $10 billion investment. And it goes on and on. So I think you're continuing to see the scale of investments. One thing I'm also starting to see now, or have more conversations with, is actually in the whether you call it edge or colo or metro edge, whatever you want to call it, but there's certainly a lot of investment now starting to look back at the smaller edge data centers, so 5 to 20 megawatt, city based. I think an area that's been forgotten because you're seeing all these big numbers, but actually is a massive market. And I think some company at some point will take huge advantage of that, and you'll see somebody do very well out of it, while everyone else has got their eyes on the 0.5 gigawatt sites wherever they may be.
Yeah, right. I'd also like the absurdity of calling a 5 to 20 megawatt data center small. is
I
kind of
don't even
funny as well, right? Like,
I don't even know what edge is anymore. I know I remember recording podcasts like 3 years ago, and I'd ask anyone that said they were edge what edge means to them, and you got a different definition every single time. And I'm still at that point. I don't know what small is. I don't know what edge is. I don't even know what big is anymore. It's like what actually? How do we scale any of this? It's like when people say, "What does hyperscale mean?" Hyperscale as a definition means like continuing to grow or something
yeah,
along those
right.
lines. But actually, we don't ever have any sort of market for these words that we use all the time. It's just, but there you go. Yeah, the smaller data centers and the bigger ones, there's definitely a huge market for that as you start to join the dots of these major campuses across whatever countries they're in and continents as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also like France is an interesting, very, very interesting area at the moment, also from a neo cloud GPU as a service standpoint. One other announcement to add to your list as well, ENI G42, 1 gigawatt in Italy as well. So, I mean, the fact that it's like, right, we're going to have a gigawatt here, we're going to have a gigawatt there, as opposed to an 100 megawatt or a 200 megawatt, I think that's probably a pretty good indication of the direction of travel. But I think France is interesting in that regard specifically because you've got the G42 and the AMD deal with Data One, I think it was.
Yeah, they are.
Which is massive in and of itself. But then at the same time, same week, this is off the back of the AI summit in Paris, FluidStack announcing a massive, massive partnership with Mistral to develop a huge amount of infrastructure in France as well. Same with Cestus as well, another gigawatt facility. And then EDF opening up, I think, 2 gigawatts of land parcels close to various nuclear power generation facilities around the country as well. France is interesting because if you look at the energy mix of France relative to every single other European country, aside from the Nordics, they're really the only ones who can support the kinds of developments at the speed that they need to happen right now. Why is that? They've got a huge amount of nuclear power generation capacity. And I think we'll probably see increasing discussion around the need to develop more of that fast in non-traditional markets for nuclear, to be honest, because I mean, France has shown that it can work, right? They wouldn't be getting these deals if it wasn't viable. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some projects rushed through, well, relatively speaking, rushed for nuclear. So we're probably still, 5-10 years out, to be honest. But I think that's where things are going to go.
Yeah, Telehouse ended last week as well. I think €1 billion investment in France, and
yeah,
I think it was a 90. I might be wrong on this, but around 96 megawatt in Marseille was part of that.
Oh,
so yeah,
small,
exactly.
only
Yeah,
96.
One of the smaller edge facilities in Marseille. But Marseille's an interesting area. Again, France is interesting. Marseille, a lot of development coming up there. It's connected very well. Obviously, Paris is a big, big challenge for a number of reasons. Talent, it's one of the worst places to recruit for. I can vouch for that with definite certainty. We always try our best, but it's difficult. But yeah, southern France, yeah, good areas, a lot of development. The other campus or development that I find quite interesting is old Kevin O'Leary's Wonder Valley in Alberta in Canada. I don't know if anyone's seen the video. It reminds me of a Center Parcs video. Every time I watch it, I see the deers running around in the background. I think it's like me back at Center Parcs. Similar price for a week in Center Parcs as well, $70 billion to anyone that's ever been in the UK. But it's an interesting development. I think there was a video probably a few weeks ago of him needs to raise the first 10 billion or something for that development. But he's interesting character. He's quite like for those that don't know who he is, he's kind of similar Dragon's Den type character. Very public, big investor. Whether it will happen or not, I think is up for debate. But it's worth a look. Wonder Valley, it's cool. If anyone hasn't seen it, go and watch the video. And if you've been to Center Parcs, you'll know exactly what I mean. But if he does do it, I'm definitely going because it looks cool.
Oh, yeah, it looks super interesting. And what's the total power capacities for it?
I can't remember.
Like 7.5 gigawatts.
Yeah, I was going to say,
what's stuck in my head.
Yeah, 7 gig is in my head.
It's ridiculous. But then, like to that point, it's in Canada, right? And they're going to be targeting US customers, and that's potentially a difficult proposition right now, given the ongoing geopolitical struggles. I think would be the most delicate way to put a description of the relationship between the US and Canada right now. I think it's super interesting. I think Canada's a really, really interesting proposition at the moment because of the amount of power and the amount of energy that they have available. It's just, if things kind of carry on as they are, who's the offtake? Because that's a hyperscale facility. That has to be a hyperscale facility. But all of the hyperscalers are American.
Yeah, and you are
how do you square that circle, right?
Exactly, and you are seeing, geopolitical is coming into strategy now, 100%. Definitely seeing it. Another point I thought of while you were talking is actually, which again you'll be quite aligned, I haven't written it down, but the move away from the likes of Crusoe and Applied and that moving away from the Bitcoin into AI infrastructure. I think you've seen, obviously it's been happening for a while. I've been working with funds that have been doing this for a good few years, but you've seen a few more public announcements now of, we are no longer, in the Bitcoin world. We are now an AI infrastructure developer. So that's quite an interesting shift as you start to, especially with the AI, and if we are moving away from learning, etc., where does all that fit in? Because a lot of these are huge scale facilities, but in fairly remote locations. So it's going to be interesting to see where that market goes. But in the US, you're seeing it now. There's a very, very clear shift from, we're a bit of both to, we're definitely sitting on the AI side of the fence now.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that it's an interesting move that makes sense, really, because if you look at what Bitcoin mining is, it's massive amounts of compute deployment incredibly quickly. It's pretty good experience if you're looking at what's going on in the AI space now, what's required. Those facilities tend to have massive power capacity available. Depending on where the mining is taking place, that does tend to influence how socially, geopolitically, morally, whatever you want to call it, acceptable Bitcoin mining is seen to be. I think that perceptions will change because there's some really interesting work going on in the Bitcoin mining space around deployment in support of renewable energy, for example, like microgrids, for example, and Daniel Batten of C4 Capital does some really, really interesting work in that space. But I think the shift away from Bitcoin mining into specific AI compute, GPU compute, AI infrastructure makes sense for a couple of reasons. One, as I said before, these companies have the experience in doing it, like CoreWeave, for example, Core Scientific. That's what they were doing first. Now they've gone public with CoreWeave, right? Bit Digital has also spun off a new entity recently, White Fiber, again for the same kind of reason. And there's also probably a pretty compelling argument that the reason that's being done is from an exit multiple standpoint. If you've got any Bitcoin mining on your balance sheet, you're going to be probably capped at maybe a 5x EBITDA multiple. If you are AI infrastructure, that's significantly higher, like 15x plus, right? So it's significantly more valuable as a business, even though it's basically just servers doing math, right? What's the fundamental difference in terms of the activity that is being done? It's not really that different. It's hardware using huge amounts of power in a big shed somewhere with a huge amount of power available to it that's going to be difficult to cool depending on how much is in there. The output is slightly different. Depending on who you ask, you could probably make a pretty compelling argument that Bitcoin mining is creating more value at the moment than all of the training. But I think that's probably a trend that we'll see accelerate because, I mean, even if the companies don't shift into hosting and deploying the infrastructure themselves, they've got the PPAs, they've got the facilities, they've got the power available to them. And that is the one thing that AI as a whole is going to need going forward. So going back to the keynote, first thing that Jensen said, we're a power constrained industry. It's not compute anymore, it's power availability. And if you've got 600 kilowatt racks coming in 2027, realistically, we could probably see a meg not long after that, maybe 2 meg not too long after that. That's a lot of power. Where's it going to come from? Who's already got access to it? The miners have got a lot of it right now in the short term.
Yeah, and I regularly get asked, what's the current price for powered land? Like what is the value of, let's say, or whatever the power is? But powered land is certainly going to increase in value, I would say, over the coming years. And there'll probably come a point where, is it better to develop it or flip it? And I guess there'll be the conversations that the people in those positions will have. The other thing I wanted to talk about was just events, but Data Center World London. I don't know. Did you go or not?
Yeah, we were on the stand. So Pete and I, Panchair Limited, we were exhibiting with PMY. So yeah, we were there. It was an interesting event.
I just
Felt
want to.
slightly different.
I just wonder how busy it was. That was all. Like, I just
It
couldn't
was the
believe.
first day was mad, like
Yeah, I was there the first
absolutely
day.
manic. Um, it was non-stop. Like we got onto the stand shortly before 9 o'clock, started talking at about 9:30, and then didn't finish talking until about 4:30. So really, really solid footfall. In terms of demographics and the types of conversations that were being had, last year felt a little bit more like people were there and they were ready to deploy, right? So they were, instead of tire kicking, it was more of right, we've got a project, we've got a pilot project, we want to understand this pilot project, maybe we want to deploy some hardware, maybe we want to continue the conversation afterwards. And that was also more general, so it wasn't just AI last year. There was a bit around visualization, there was a bit around render. This year, pretty much only AI, but also a little bit more hesitation around what's going on, how best to do things, which makes sense given current market conditions and the speed with which everything is moving. But otherwise, really, really good event.
I was
Yeah,
just thinking when I
trying
was
to keep
there
up.
of, yeah, exactly. I was just thinking when I was there of, I don't know how many years I've been going to that event, and that's why I use it as a comparator because I've been going for, let's say, 10 years. I've no idea how many years I've been going, but every year it just gets busier and busier and busier. And I think
Yeah,
it's a good way to just understand what's happened to the industry, isn't it? And I don't mean how many stands are there. I just mean how many people, like in general, are actually there. I'm sure the event organizers will give us stats around, there's more stands or more footfall or whatever, or more registrations, but it's just the amount of the mass of people. You'd kind of walk into the Excel and you'd get collared 25 times within about 100 meters of people that you know. And then you go into the event and it just gets more and more and more. And I think this industry is mainstream now, isn't it? There's no hiding away anymore.
yeah, right. Yeah, it's yeah, I mean, seeing data centers being, I say that as someone, as if I'm like someone who understands how this industry works, right? I've been in here for about a year, to be honest. But public conversation around it is something that does seem to have picked up, even in just the past 12 months, right? So I'm sure you've seen the long tail of the growth and how we've kind of ended up in this position, but it does seem like things have really accelerated over the course of the past year. Now, coming from the crypto industry, the fact that everyone is talking about it now does make me a little bit worried because that tends to imply that there's a top signal and everything's about to fall apart. But hey, maybe this time is different.
Yeah, exactly. You just don't know. But I just found it, really. I was a couple of colleagues there, and I was just saying, how busy it is now. And we held a data center marketing club event the night before the actual thing, and even that, we had I don't know how many people, like just did it off the cuff, like 60 to 100 people turn up and talk about marketing, and it's just crazy now. You can get all these people in a room from just little silos within the industry, all trying to understand where we're at and what's happening because the change is so quick. And I think that's what it is. It changes before your eyes, but you don't really see it. You don't notice it until you're at these points where you're like, I was
Yep.
here last year and it wasn't this busy, or I wasn't having this many conversations last year. And I just find it fascinating when you go to the major events. And I know people that have been, obviously I went to Kickstart this year. It was the busiest year they've ever had. I'm sure MIPIM was crazy. I didn't go, but I'm sure it was crazy. Obviously you were at GTC. You've got Data Center Nation in Milan, I think this week, which I'm sure will be a busy event because Milan is off the scale with regards to investments. You've got all the platform events that are coming up. You've got Data Cloud Can, who I know are planning for a record event. It just goes on and on and on. And then you add in the US as well. I haven't been out to the US for a while, but you add in all the events out there. DCD New York was last week. Spoke to a couple of people who just said it was the busiest it's ever been. So it's just getting busier and busier and busier. And I think it's important that we remain in the industry and focused on what we're doing because there is so much noise now, so much happening outside.
Yeah, yeah, massively so. And I think the increased public attention is good on the one hand, right? Because it means that people are talking about it and more people are aware of the problems, right? So power availability, for example, right? That's now a very much mainstream conversation, especially in the UK. But then on the other hand, it does make it more difficult to try and keep up with what's actually going on, right? As opposed to having to filter through secondhand, third-hand sources of information to try and figure out, right, what's the announcement? What was the announcement of the announcement? What's actually important? What isn't important? What's some really clever PR that doesn't actually mean anything? And that's difficult at the best of times. Now it feels more challenging than it was.
Yeah, no, totally. We were saying before we come on, trying to write a weekly newsletter is
right. What do you put in it? What do you choose?
Exactly. It's very enjoyable, and I'm not complaining by any stretch of both of us. I'm talking for Ben, but I'm sure he's as amazed by the success of his as I am of mine, and love the fact that it adds so much value. But yeah, it gets more difficult every say few months to kind of collate all that information because there's so much noise now, and news is repeated, regurgitated. People will release a press release 3 or 4 times in a year, which I'm sure a lot of people don't even see, but it happens quite a lot. And I have to go back and check, have I said this before? Is this a deja vu moment, or have I actually written this before? And a lot of time you have written it before. So yeah, it's difficult. So if any of the PR companies out there could try and keep it aligned, do a better job, we'd be much appreciated.
Do us a solid. Make our lives a little bit easier.
Yeah, exactly. Feel free to send us any press releases because it means we don't have to dig around for it.
Yeah, legit.
Exactly. No, yeah, I'm deadly serious.
Seriously,
we'll add both our email addresses to the show notes. The other thing I wanted to shout out was shout out to Stephen Beard and C. Lau, of Knight Frank. I don't know if everyone will have seen this, but they've just run 600 kilometers in 10 days, 7 UAE states for autism awareness. Stephen's child, has autism, and Steve's trying to raise $1 million for an app to help parents and children that are in a similar situation. So I want to shout out, like, ridiculous achievement. I think sometimes these things go under the radar. So I just wanted to give it a shout out. I'll put the GoFundMe in the show notes of this episode. So if you can support, please support. And if you can't, just give it a repost and share a bit of awareness for what they've done, because it's ridiculous, to be honest. I couldn't even run 600 kilometers in 10 years. They've done it in 10 days.
Yeah, I mean, ultra marathons are a different kind of experience. Yeah, I did see that actually. What an achievement, especially in that part of the world as well. Like from a weather standpoint, it's not necessarily conducive to a pleasant experience, and running that kind of distance isn't pleasant. I've done, what have I done before? I've done 80 kilometers or something over the course of 2 days, and that sucked. So 600 over the course of 10. Fair play to them.
Yeah, exactly. And again, like, always give causes a shout out. I know Data Center Cycling Club have got the event coming up where they cycle to Cannes every year, which I don't know if they're doing it before or after this year, but you'll find the website, Data Center Cycling Club. Go and have a look. 6 days of cycling. But there's a lot of good causes out there in the industry, a lot of great people doing great things for causes that are outside of the industry, not related to the industry, but they're by people in the industry. So, if anyone's seeing anything or doing anything, I tell you what, if anyone's doing anything, come on this with me and Ben. We'll give you 5 minutes to have a little chat about what you're doing. So I'd love to give a shout out to anything like that. Anything else, Ben? I know we've just covered 6 weeks of news in
I think we've covered
half
quite a bit, haven't we? I think so. I think what would be interesting, to hear from your side, obviously, for me, with things like the 600 kilowatt racks that are on the horizon with the Rubin Ultras, right? 2 other things that stood out. One, Jensen's comments in the keynote around Hopper being dead, right? Don't buy Hopper, and then branding himself as the chief revenue destroyer. That doesn't sound like a particularly easy place to be if you've just placed a very large order for what is now effectively being termed as dead kit. That doesn't make life particularly easy. What was the reaction that you saw from 600 kilowatts plus racks being legitimately positioned as what's coming next. Like, what's the reaction been from outside of the rack? How does one cope?
I think people have been talking about it for a while, not specifically, obviously, the 600 kilowatt announcement, but the density and the challenge that that creates. I think the people I always try and talk, like the CTOs of this world, who are involved in the technical and the design and the future proofing of these facilities, are in a very, very difficult spot. And I think I would say there's not, I didn't have any specific like calls around it going, oh, Andy, have you heard the 600? Because I think everybody kind of knew that it's going in that direction. It's just a case of how high and where does it end, I guess, is the challenge. And ensuring that your developments and your data centers are designed for a point in the future and not for today. It's absolutely pointless designing a data center for whatever kit you have today. I think that's the biggest challenge. And I think that's why we're seeing that, like I said earlier, that analysis of CapEx. I don't think it's like we don't need capacity anymore. I think it's more, what on earth do we need our facility to look like? Where do we need capacity? Who is going to be the customer? I think they're all the questions they're asking. There'll be some casualties, I would say, of data centers that have been recently launched with a certain infrastructure / kit inside them, and how long is that actually fit for purpose? I think I'm talking, reading between lines, no one said anything to me, but I think that will cause some people some problems, would be my view. But yeah, the density, scale, everything has been the conversation for ages. And most of the podcasts I talk to, when I talk to anybody that's technical, that's where you end up. But no one knows the answer, do they? Jensen's obviously going to say whatever he's doing is the right thing to do.
Right.
Yeah, and I get that as well. And I think a lot of people see that. It's that's why I said earlier, Jensen's one of some. But yeah, it's fascinating where it's going. I personally don't think anybody really knows. And I think I did a post on LinkedIn not long ago, basically saying that anyone who gives you the answer probably doesn't know the answer, because I just don't think there is one. You can have assumptions and you can have direction, you can have education and guesses and viewpoints. If there's a definitive answer, we'd all be lumping our money somewhere, wouldn't we? And you've only got to look at the financial markets. There's a lot of uncertainty with regards to which stock's going to go, which one's going to win, who's going to do best out of this. And capital normally gives you the greatest barometer of direction. I think follow the money, as they say.
Yeah, except when it's DeepSeek, because then apparently the market gets it wrong. Right.
Yeah.
To quote Jensen, that's not me. That's not my perspective. To quote Jensen, then the market gets it wrong.
And that's when you get into the geopolitical market, though, isn't it? It's like, again, we don't know. We just don't know. You have to just look at it and go, I'll make an educated decision myself. But I understand that politically, they're going to say something.
Yeah.
That's all I can say on that.
Yeah. Okay, so follow-on question then. If the power is going in one direction, the rack density is going in one direction, occasionally you'll see like an announcement, new data center facility, 10 to 50 megawatts of power, 45,000 square foot facility, right? If you've got 600 kilowatt racks that they're rated for, and they'll have probably 50% more power draw in the burn-in phase, that is 10 racks in a 45,000 square foot facility. What do you do with the rest of that space? Because that, to me, as an outsider who's kind of come in and understanding how things are working, that just doesn't seem like the way to build things anymore. It just doesn't seem to make sense.
No, agreed. And again, I had a conversation with someone, a genuine conversation with someone not long ago about five-side football pitches and go-kart tracks. And,
right.
No, and it wasn't, it wasn't a joke. It was a genuine, like, there's going to be so much empty space, I think, and obviously a limitation of power, which means you can't just say, okay, we'll just put more racks in it, because you haven't got the power to switch them on, for want of putting it in a more simple term. So I'm with you on this, and I think that is part of the challenges with where to put your money and how to build. I think it's you can obviously identify those sites that have significant power availability and kind of build your first phase, knowing that you've got, say, another 300-400 meg available to you when you need it but you might not need the building. You might just need the power. But for the legacy data centers, which is probably the ones that we're more talking about, the ones that are there and they're already, 100,000 square meters or whatever they might be, I don't know. Will they reduce the size of it and offset part of the land? I genuinely have no idea. Like, I'm serious with the 5-side football pitches. I think it's it's a definite possibility. I think there is one somewhere with a go-kart track in it. I might have made that up. I'm pretty sure there is a data center
That's
somewhere.
fantastic. If there isn't one, that sounds like an opportunity.
Yeah, but I don't know, and it is a conversation that happens that I talk to people about, and again, like, is that? I think that's the period we're in. I genuinely do. Yeah, when Jensen says an inflection point, I think the industry's at an inflection point as well. It's not just AI that's at an inflection point. It's like, what do we do? I wish I knew the answer, but again, there's probably someone listening that's got a better educated guess of where it will go than I have. But I do believe that nobody has a degree of certainty in their viewpoint.
Yeah, and I think like the reduction in footprint size does kind of rest on the assumption that ultimately NVIDIA's way of doing things right now is the right way to do things and the only way to do things right, which is more power, more rack density, more powerful hardware off the back of it. And with some of the emerging semiconductor manufacturers, they are showing that there is potentially a different way of doing things. Now, how much success they end up having, that kind of remains to be seen, because with the CUDA ecosystem, I mean, NVIDIA's got a pretty compelling competitive advantage there, right? Coupled with the fact that they've open sourced a load of the new software off the back of GTC2, like Dynamo, for example, for orchestrating large-scale clusters for inference workloads. But then if you look at what's also happened in the semiconductor space recently, I think the most interesting one is Furiosa AI. So if anyone's not familiar, they're a South Korean semiconductor manufacturer focused specifically on inference hardware, and they rejected, or apparently rejected, an $800 million bid from Meta to buy them out recently. That's quite interesting because, I mean, that's backing yourself to a pretty significant degree, like saying no to 800 mil, fair play if it was said. But if that's the right business decision, what do they see in the future? And their cards are interesting because they're 150 watt cards. The server gets potentially double the token throughput for, say, Llama 3.1 than the AMD hardware, again, at a significantly lower price point, right? So for power constrained markets or older facilities, for example, that's potentially an interesting solution. Now, the emerging semiconductors, I mean, even AMD to a certain extent, they're kind of struggling to gain market share at the moment. But then when we do see larger scale adoption, I think the market's going to be very, very large, right? And it's a new market at the end of the day. And there's always space for new players and new solutions in new markets. And at the end, like, the massive amount of floor space and the power constraints is a problem to be solved, right? So whoever can solve that particular problem, that's potentially something quite interesting. So I think if you do have a 45,000 square foot facility and you're worried about only having 10 racks in that, I wouldn't worry too much. There's probably something else that we just don't know about yet that's going to appear out of nowhere and provide you with a solution, hopefully.
Yeah, something that will change the game. It always does. And
yeah,
gives us something to talk about anyway, doesn't it? If it wasn't for that, we wouldn't be talking now. So appreciate all this uncertainty. It gives us something to chat about. I think that's all. All I was going to say is, obviously, this is the second episode we've done. We are going to do it, try and get to once a month, hopefully. But if not, we'll stick at 6 weeks. We're doing our best. If anyone wants to come on that's listening, and if any news breaks in the next month or 6 weeks, depending on when we record, and you want to come on and talk about it, please do. I'm all up for getting some other opinions of what's happening in the market. We'll always give you our opinion and what we're seeing. But if anybody else wants to join us, please do. And like I said earlier, if anyone's doing anything a bit different, in the industry, charitable or events or whatever it might be, happy to give you a plug. And if it helps raise some money for somebody, all the better. We better get on. We've got newsletters to write.
Right.
It's only Monday when we're recording it. Probably release this on Friday, so hopefully our newsletters won't be far away by the time you hear this. But I'll put the GoFundMe in the show notes. Obviously, if you need myself or Ben, we're pretty easy to find. Just come and find us. But thanks for your time, Ben. Good to catch up again. Now you're back in the UK.
Likewise, Andy. Yep. One final question for you. Hopefully in a month's time, predictions. Based on what you're seeing right now and where there's a little bit of interest, what do you reckon we might end up potentially be talking about next month?
Prediction time. You could have given me a heads up on this one. I think we're going to see
Just out of nowhere.
a bit more of this uncertainty with CapEx would be I think we might see a few more, whether it's analysts or news articles that break about projects being, let's say, delayed or reevaluated. I would guess in April. It's April Fool's Day tomorrow. So from April, that'll be my prediction. What about you?
Cool. I think more discussion around sovereign AI. I think that's going to become more of a talking point that's going to slowly work its way into the mainstream a little bit more. Yeah.
So there you go. We'll record the next episode when both of those predictions come true. So it might be in 4 weeks. Right. It might see us again in 2 years. But anyway, thanks for listening, everyone. We'll do it again in the next month or so.